All right, I think we've waited long enough. And the winner of GameSpot's Game of the Year for 2014 is...
I'm right here, son. I'm right here. Yours.
Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor is GameSpot's Game of the Year for 2014, and we're doing something for the very first time here at GameSpot. We actually have game director Michael DePlatter from Monolith right here. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Hooray!
Wow.
Nice work. To you and the team. The team don't know that you guys have won it all.
I think they're probably learning about it right now.
Wonderful.
I can imagine there's a few glasses being raised at Monolith as we speak.
So congratulations. It's obviously a new IP. You guys aren't the biggest team in the world in terms of game development, especially for a game of this type. What does it feel like winning a Game of the Year award, and kind of what does it mean to like the longevity of a franchise like this?
Kind of a little bit lost for words, because, you know, all of those things you said were really true. It's our first open world game. It's our first third-person action game. It's the first game in what hopefully gets to become a new franchise, so sort of a bit overwhelming.
Let's talk a little bit about the sort of inception of what this game was, because obviously there's a lot of stories out there about your guys' association with Warner Brothers and whatnot, about this originally not being a Middle-earth game at all.
We certainly, we took a lot of our inspiration from Arkham in the sense of that's how we wanted to approach the license. In the same way that, the Arkham games were coming out in parallel with Chris Nolan's Batman movies.
Right.
But they absolutely weren't the game of the movie. It was, Chris Nolan's trying to make the best possible Batman movie he can, and Rocksteady's trying to make, the most amazing Batman game that they can, and we really took that as well. And everyone from Peter Jackson to Warner Brothers to the licensors was so supportive in that. Don't do a movie game, do the best game that you can. So it was great to have that sort of support. And they were really the only two things we ever got pressure on was quality and innovation. Really pushed to try and do something different and bring something new to it.
So what was that innovation as far as you were concerned? Because obviously, you can go in so many directions with this franchise, but also with the genre, and it's a genre that we've kind of gotten used to over the past, 5, 6, 7 years on consoles.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it a little bit before with saying, it was our first go, and being a smaller team, and wanting to do something new, and wanting to use the power of the next generation of consoles, that we really wanted to enable players to go into Middle-earth and create their own stories. Like, obviously we put a lot of effort into the story because you have to be very, very respectful of that, and we're huge fans of Middle-earth, but really, the biggest stories that are told in that universe are going to be told in the films and the books, but what we can do as a game that no other medium can do is let people make their own stories. So that was really our sort of central goal right from the start. And then once we thought sort of that, we started thinking, what are the most important relationships players actually have in action games? And it's really with your enemies and with the villains. But of course, historically, people put a lot of effort into NPCs and friends and allies. And like, okay, what if we take all of that effort and all of those relationships
Yeah.
and put it onto the bad guys and let you build these really meaningful personal relationships and create your own villains in the game as well. So that was sort of the inception of that idea that became the Nemesis system.
The discussions for this year's Game of the Year, as with every year that I've been involved here at GameSpot, went on for hours and hours, and I feel like we sort of tear apart every game mechanically in as many ways as we can to try and come up with what was the best Game of the Year, not just mechanically actually in terms of every aspect of it, but one thing that kept coming up, Kevin, in our discussions was how the Nemesis system sort of changed the way you approach almost everything in terms of a third-person open-world adventure game.
Sure.
Instead of you know, basically having the breadcrumb trail and picking and choosing what you wanted to do, sometimes just instances happened like of emergent gameplay out of nowhere with, you know, when you hadn't anticipated it. Almost like you were playing the game to the game's rules rather than to the beat you wanted to do.
Yeah, it was interesting too because, I mean, every year it's a little bit different in terms of, okay, does it go to the game that was just the most well-executed game of its type? Does it go to the game that's going to mean the most in 10 years in terms of what it introduced? Or there are so many different ways to go, but this was an interesting one because you could say both about it. You know, on one hand, it was the best game of its type really that came along this year, and you know, when I would say that Assassin's Creed is the closest analog, it was certainly the best Assassin's Creed game that came out this year.
And there were a couple of those.
Yes, there were. But beyond that, it also came down to what thing did we see in games that we can see other developers learning from and being inspired by in the years to come. And the Nemesis system was the thing that clearly came up more often than any other individual game mechanic that we actually discussed this year. In fact, I would say in terms of individual game-changing mechanics, we didn't actually, at least not in that, you know, supposed AAA space, we didn't really see a whole lot of that this year. And so this was kind of an easy choice in terms of the mechanic we thought was worth, you know, most worth being ripped off.
And we did. I mean, we touched on that during our discussion of like GameSpot's winners past. I mean, with Gears of War and the active reload in the cover, with Demon's Souls and that kind of multiplayer overlap. You know, those are all things that we have since seen propagate throughout the game industry like wildfire. And I think if stuff like the Nemesis system does that, we'll all be the better for it.
But there was also another part of it, and I feel like we often get really stuck on the Nemesis system when we talk about the game. And I kept bringing up this many times, which is, okay, so we've seen similar mechanics before, but we've never seen some of these little touches that can make the difference between a game that just has a lot of stuff and a game that has a lot of stuff, most of which is actually meaningful.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of the discussion as well. So, for example, you know, you can't just go in there and know that, you know, hey, I've played Arkham before, I've played Assassin's Creed before, I know how to respond to all of these attacks and just do the thing until everybody's dead. Oh, no, you're not going to pull off that shit in Shadow of Mordor. You have mechanics that, instead of being like, and I hate to do the little Assassin's Creed comparison, so forgive me in advance. But it's sometimes it's easy to draw a comparison between a game that does this thing but doesn't do it as well as the thing this game does. And so you have, like, here's a collection of mechanics. You could use your smoke bombs if you want, but who cares? You never need to do that. Just play the damn thing without it. Here's suddenly a case where it's like, what are all of the things I can do, and how do I need to use them to actually conquer the challenge in front of me?
To not keep getting killed by all of these friggin' orcs.
And suddenly you have, suddenly the addition of challenge means that you also have the addition of meaning to mechanics that in other games are just there to be there. Now you have mechanics that are there because there's actually worth in testing them, in exploring them, and actually sometimes using them when you might not have if the game didn't prompt you and didn't really necessitate that kind of approach. You know, you've got the enemies with the, you know, the different weaknesses and strengths. And when I first heard about that, I was like, oh, well, it's just a thing developers say. No, this wasn't just a thing developers say in this case. This was a real meaningful thing. And, you know, that's one of the great things too. We're so used to just hearing they're just words. Anybody can say these things.
Or line items on a PR list.
Yeah.
One of the things that sort of stands out to me about this, maybe you can speak to how you guys felt on the development side, is there's a lot of rules that we've sort of come to understand in this genre that you guys either ignore or actively go against. For instance, the idea that if you lose a fight, you don't just hit reload and you try and fight them again. It's actually not just going to be as hard, it's going to be harder than the last time. Were you guys ever worried that you were going to step into ground that was going to make gamers feel uncomfortable? Because so much of what we see with big AAA games is placating players and trying to make them not feel like it's too difficult.
Yeah, very much, because it was really scary at a lot of points to do that, because we had a mechanic that was built on you having more of an emotional connection to your enemy. So you have to love to hate them.
Okay.
And the only way to develop that true hatred is to have them take things from you or beat you or frustrate you. So, you know, even things of discussions, like we could have had an easy mode, and if we did, the game would have fundamentally been broken, because if you could just hack and slash your way through the game without having to stop and think, without getting killed, without seeing these guys level up, without the world evolving, people wouldn't have got to, you know, experience the Nemesis system. And I mean, to be brutally honest, we saw that the people who were the people who were at the very sort of end of the bell curve in terms of their coordination and skill and their ability, the people who found the game most easy were also the ones who found the Nemesis system least engaging. So it would definitely be much more the case that, you know, and we're looking at this with DLC 2 as well. I think actually a hard mode is probably what we needed even more in some ways than an easy mode. But what we did was we made sure that you had to stop and think, that your enemies were going to annoy you, frustrate you, attack you, you know, piss you off, but that you had the tools that if you stopped, planned, studied their weaknesses, you could also take them apart really easily. So you could, for example, have someone who was impossibly hard unless you studied his weakness and used his fear, and then he'd run screaming like a baby and you could just take him down. So we wanted to sort of maximize the, I guess, the tangent between, okay, it's gone from incredibly hard to incredibly easy because you've manipulated the system in the right way, and you really get to own these guys and take them down, except, of course, that sometimes they then come back to sort of have another go at you again.
One of the things that keeps coming up on Twitter and the comments on GameSpot is 2014 was one of those years where we saw a lot of games, either established franchises or new ones, just technically have a lot of issues with them. One of the things that came up in our discussion, I guess, is we kept mentioning things like the Nemesis system because stuff like the combat, the world exploration, and then also technically, there was nothing there that stood out as like, it was all kind of smooth. It was not flawless, I wouldn't say, but there was nothing really to take issue with at all. Technically, you guys made a game that, you know, I've never had any problems with. It doesn't come up in discussions, and the internet seems so sensitive to it now. How did you guys, as a relatively, you know, not a massive like Ubisoft outfit who's got seemingly millions of people working on a game, create a game that came out in a timely fashion, but also didn't have any like major technical hiccups?
I think, I mean, you know, it's sort of a cliche, but making games is hard, obviously. And I think partly it was the factor that it was our first go at this type of game, so we were so incredibly paranoid and so fearful that we did close things down early. Our production was really diligent about closing things down. Our QA did just a phenomenal job. Having our own engine, you know, and our own tech team, and having those guys on site was hugely integral to it. So it just really was, you know, it was a big goal of ours. It was a priority to do that because you don't get two chances. Like if we had have come out and stumbled on our first go, we'd never be getting a second one, basically.
When did the point come where you felt confident about this game? Was it, you know, when you went gold, or was it like a week after launch? Or?
It was probably, I guess, Thanksgiving.
Okay. You were giving thanks?
No, exactly. But it was like, you know, like a month after launch when you've seen the reviews and you've seen things settle in, and you can see the user reviews and you can see people playing it and you can see people's streams. So, yes, a month or so after we came out, I guess.
So you guys ready and willing to take another bite at it? Jump back into the maelstrom of game development again?
Well, that's, I mean, and that's why it's so incredibly exciting and meaningful to get an award like this as well, because it really does help us have that chance. There was actually, the other day, Ken Levine from BioShock, he wrote a pretty cool blog post, and he was talking about the Nemesis system and talking about procedural storytelling and so on, and it was really complimentary and it was great, but he described the Nemesis system in Shadow of Mordor is very much the sort of baby steps towards a new type of storytelling and dynamic storytelling, and that's really true. You know, we've learned so much in the course of doing this game, and are so excited to get to apply that knowledge and kind of move forward.
Excellent. Michael de Platter, congratulations once again for Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor,
Thank you
winning
so much.
GameSpot's Game of the Year 2014.
Thank you.
Hooray!
Hooray!
Yay!